Hi, welcome. This is the Addiction Show. I am your host, Shira Goldberg. Thank you for tuning in. Today I have with me Bill Piper. He's the Director of National Affairs over at the Drug Policy Alliance. He's on, I think, every one of my social media feeds, and I'm always just amazed at the capacity that this organization is involved in. They are nationwide. Bill Piper is the director, like I said, and he's based in Washington, D.C. He's responsible for developing and implementing strategies for ending the federal war on drugs. And if you think about that, that's quite a task on your job description. He also lobbies Congress in support of cutting drug war waste, and he protects state marijuana laws from federal interference. He's reforming or partially reforming draconian sentencing laws. There's a lot of racial disparity relating to that. We'll talk about that a little bit. And he's also part of restructuring federal law enforcement agencies and preventing drug overdoses through the transmission of HIV and hepatitis C. So, whew, that took a lot to read, let alone do. So thanks so much, Bill, for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me on your show. I appreciate it.
Well, you know, you really do a lot. It sounds overwhelming. I don't know how you're like a superhero.
Well, I don't know if I'm a superhero. It is worth noting that I have a team of 5 people working with me in the D.C. office. So we do a lot of work. We cover a lot of ground in Congress and in the executive branch, and also locally in D.C. So there's a lot of people working on this. And then, of course, we wouldn't be able to get anything accomplished if it wasn't for all the people on the ground in the various states who call their members of Congress and or email their members of Congress, etc. That's where I always like to reinforce that that's where the real action is. That the more people call and contact their members of Congress, the easier our job is.
Absolutely. And you're a prime example. The Drug Policy Alliance, it sounds like it's just this massive organization with thousands of people at the helm, but really it's a grassroots kind of effort, but you are recognized nationally, and you're in Washington, but we really need to have the involvement of people at the local level, and Drug Policy Alliance makes that very accessible.
Yeah, we have we have offices around the country, but we really are we take our cues from our membership, from our supporters who want to see alternatives to the war on drugs, and we basically represent the millions of Americans who believe the war on drugs is doing more harm than good. And so we don't always necessarily agree on what to replace it with, but we all agree that the status quo is not working, and we need to try new approaches. And so that's what we're doing, is trying new approaches.
Yeah, I agree. Creating dialogue is the first step in the right direction, and also being informed. I've seen the drugpolicyalliance.org website, and you make the information pretty available. Depending on the state that someone's in, they can just click on it and see what's currently going on and what is being passed through Congress and how that's affecting people directly.
Yeah, we like to keep people updated. So I'd always like to encourage people that, in addition to going to drugpolicy.org, which is our website, people can sign up for our email list if they really want to stay informed, because we let people know what's going on in Congress, but then also, depending on the state someone lives in, what's going on at the state level. There's a lot going on, from marijuana legalization to reforming draconian sentencing to treatments of incarceration, overdose prevention. I've been working at Drug Policy Alliance since April of 2000, so 15 years, and I've never been more optimistic that we're close. We are very close to ending this war on drugs and treating drug use as a health issue. Like every day we get closer.
It's really exciting for me to be a part of this movement, as we all are, if we get involved, to see what's really happening. It's pretty amazing considering what the war on drugs. It's almost been it's been such a hindrance in really understanding what are more positive ways to go about things. And I'm in agreement with you. I don't have the answer. I wish I did, what to replace it with, but it's been proven pretty much that that plan did not work, and we're still feeling the aftermath. We're in the ramifications, and some people will have that through the rest of their lives. Like you're talking about these sentencing laws.
Yeah, our country, in the last 40 years has arrested tens of millions of Americans. We've spent more than $1 trillion. The police kick in people's doors, point machine guns at children, shoot dogs. It's been an all-out war for 40 years. Yet drugs are cheap and potent and readily available in every community. And so we know what doesn't work, which is criminalization and incarceration. And we have an idea of some things that work. We know treatment is cheaper and more effective than incarceration. There's a lot of harm reduction programs, from needle exchange programs, reduce the spread of HIV/AIDS, or making naloxone available to reduce drug overdoses. And so we have a good sense of what to replace the failed war on drugs with. And then of course states are beginning to experiment with new approaches, including legalization. So there really isn't necessarily a one-size-fits-all solution. So which is why I'm excited to do what I do, which is trying to end the federal war on drugs. So I see that as being the biggest obstacle. That if we can just get the federal government out of the way and let states try new approaches,
Right.
then we will see what works. And I think states would do a lot more, if they could. They'd also stop doing a lot of bad things that the federal government got, out of the way. I mean, basically, the federal government pays states to arrest people. The more people you arrest, the more money you get. So that's an issue that we're trying to work on.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, because that's one of the things that I've noticed. It's really a billion-dollar industry, so I don't know what the incentive is for if things are privatized, like prisons. They're owned for profit, not for rehabilitation. So these prisons get money depending on as many prisoners they have, just like how some schools get funding per child. So it's really big business, and it really runs the gamut of the correctional officers, the attorneys, the judges. So it's more almost like shifting a cultural component in this.
Yeah, there's the cultural component. Then there's just people's self-interests that we're trying to undo as well. As you point out, that private prisons make money off of this. The prison guard unions themselves, in some states like California, are our biggest opponents because the more people in prison means more prison guards. You have the drug testing industry, which makes a lot of money off of drug testing people, and then of course the prosecutors and the police and everyone else. And there's so much money involved in the status quo. But we're slowly beginning to unwind that, in large part because the cost, the fiscal cost, but also the human cost, is so huge that we just can't afford to continue doing this anymore. So a lot of policymakers are beginning to realize they have no choice but to start enacting reforms.
Now that must be quite interesting, because a lot of politicians really don't want to be associated with legalizing drugs because of just the stigma and the lack of understanding. So let's talk about that, because I think for the people that I know, you're really equated with, like, as if that's all you do, but protecting the legalization of marijuana in various states. So what do you do exactly, and how? I think also if you could touch on how is that going to determine other drugs being legalized, because I think people really don't see a certain process or the rationale behind legalizing marijuana, because they think if we're going to legalize marijuana, then we're going to legalize crack. You know, like it's just all going to go to these scary places so quickly. So, what are the advantages of legalizing marijuana for people?
Sure. I mean, you know, as you point out, legalization of marijuana is only a small part of what we work on, but it's an important part. It's basically, you know, the most important part is taking marijuana out of the criminal justice system altogether. Out of all the drugs, it's the most widely used illegal drug. You know, we're talking about tens of millions of Americans have been arrested for a marijuana offense. And then once you're arrested, you know, that conviction follows you for life. You have a hard time getting a job, getting housing. You're prohibited from getting public housing, food stamps, school loans in some instances. And so marijuana arrest really can destroy your life and make the life of your family harder. And so we want to take marijuana completely out of the criminal justice system and put it and also take it off of the streets. I like to say, you know, we want to take marijuana off of the streets and out of our schools and put it in a regulated market. Because that's, you know, right now, anyone who wants to buy marijuana can easily buy marijuana off of a street corner. You don't, you're buying it from whoever. The money is going to organized crime. When we could regulate marijuana like alcohol or cigarettes, which isn't, you know, necessarily, you know, it's not a panacea. You're still going to have marijuana-related problems, but you're at least going to get rid of the illicit market, and you can tax it, and you can regulate it, and you can establish age controls. You can determine where it's sold and who it's sold to and how it's sold, and you can packaging and labeling, and you can do all of that, and then use the tax proceeds for treatment and prevention. And I like to contrast marijuana and cigarettes, because if you look at cigarette smoking is at an all-time low in our country, and we didn't have to arrest a single person. It was all done through taxes and regulations. In contrast, marijuana, you know, we've criminalized, we've arrested tens of millions of Americans, and yet use rates are really, really, really high. And so what we want to do, you know, is reduce the harms associated with drugs and war on drugs. And, you know, legalizing marijuana is a key part of that. Take it out of the criminal justice system altogether, and treat it more or less like alcohol is a good first step to reducing the number of people behind bars, reducing the racial disparities, but also a good step to just dealing with marijuana and marijuana use, you know, by putting it in a regulated environment.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not sure, but marijuana isn't as dangerous as someone who's a chronic smoker, and then they become the health problems get really enormous and very expensive, like with COPD and emphysema and lung cancer, throat cancer. So I don't understand people's reaction when they're really really scared about legalizing marijuana, but they don't seem to have a problem with alcohol or cigarettes. So I think with the knowledge that you're providing, and that Congress's mind's changing a little bit because of your efforts, and hopefully it'll change a lot more.
Yeah, the tide is definitely shifting. I mean, we have a majority support for, you know, legalizing, taxing, and regulating marijuana like alcohol. More and more politicians are starting to either support marijuana legalization or supporting letting states legalize marijuana if they want. So the tide has shifted. I mean, even the polling now in Texas and Louisiana show majority support for legalization. So that gives you a sign of how far this debate has come. That, you know, even in conservative states, you know, there's a majority support for legalization. And obviously 2 states, Colorado and Washington, have already legalized marijuana. Alaska and Oregon are voting on it in November. Washington, D.C. is voting on legalizing possession and home cultivation. And in 2016, we'll probably see a whole bunch of states, you know, including California, vote on the issue. So I think at this point, it's just a question of when marijuana is going to be legalized. It's no longer a question of if.
I think that's definitely going in the right direction. I live in California, and anyone can get a medical marijuana license to grow up to 10 plants. There's no serious checks and balances on that, but it seems to be unregulated, but in a regulated way. There's not you don't see a lot of drive-by shootings or overdoses or DUIs on marijuana, and the incidences where that is the case, it's usually with another substance like alcohol, which is completely legal. So those that still don't see this in the grand scope are feeling challenged by the notions of the accuracy of their information.
Yeah, and I think 20 years from now, people are going to look back and wonder what the big deal was all about.
I look at it now like that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of us look at that now, but most Americans 20 years from now, future generations are going to have a hard time understanding that marijuana was ever criminalized and outlawed, and that we actually arrested tens of millions of Americans, disproportionately people of color, for decades after decades. They're going to have a hard time fathoming. I mean, the same way that people look back at alcohol prohibition and people can't really understand why country made that mistake, and that only lasted 12 years, roughly 12 years, I think. Whereas prohibition of marijuana has been almost 70 years, but 40 years of real war on marijuana users.
Yeah.
But 20 years from now, I think it's all going to be over, at least with respect to marijuana.
Well, I think it's wonderful that this is happening in my lifetime because of your efforts, and it's really affecting a lot of people. And I think this is it's still considered a Schedule I drug, which is more detrimental as far as scheduling than cocaine.
Yeah, it's a Schedule I drug, which is supposed to be heavily addictive with no medical use. In contrast, cocaine is a Schedule II drug, and available for medical use. I mean, you do use cocaine for medical reasons, rarely, for like nose surgery and that kind of stuff in hospitals. But and for that matter, methamphetamine is available for medical use. And of course, morphine. So there's a lot of drugs that are available for medical use that are lower schedule than marijuana, and marijuana is in the toughest schedule, even though it very clearly has medical benefits, and is not nearly as addicting as currently legal drugs like alcohol or tobacco.
Right. And yeah, as far as the amphetamines, that would be legal to get a prescription for ADHD, and I know that in certain states, like Utah, there's a really high level of usage for ADHD, but it's used to get high as well. So, and that is not considered that's not even considered at the level where marijuana is right now. It's Schedule I. That's like that's the most criminal activity, the most dangerous. I mean, how it's being packaged is the worst of the worst.
Yeah, I mean, other Schedule I drugs are like heroin and LSD, ecstasy. I mean, some of those some of those shouldn't be Schedule I either. But it's definitely it's the category that is the toughest category, and marijuana definitely does not belong in there. I mean, a strong case can be made for marijuana not being scheduled at all. I mean, alcohol and tobacco aren't scheduled. Although some people would argue that they should be, but
yeah, no one's ever been prescribed smoking to alleviate anything, as far as I know. But they have been prescribed marijuana for glaucoma and cancer pain and all kinds of things.
That's right. There is actually no one's been prescribed smoking, but there is a whole class of drugs being explored that are nicotine based to treat a bunch of things. Like schizophrenia and that kind of stuff. It's kind of interesting when you get into it, but no one's actually prescribing actual cigarettes. But there may be some medicinal value to nicotine itself. the delivery device, cigarettes, is the major problem because of the smoke.
Mm-hmm.
You don't really have the same problem with marijuana smoke as you do with cigarette smoke.
What do you think of the e-cigarettes and vapor?
Yeah, it's interesting that that's taken off as a product. It definitely e-cigarettes definitely lower risks of cancer and other smoking related diseases very, 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 very significantly. So I'm all for it from a harm reduction point of view. If someone is smoking cigarettes, you should switch to e-cigarettes. It's definitely better for your health. And I'm troubled by the FDA, and there's a growing set of people who want to make it harder to get e-cigarettes. Because they're so anti-smoking that they've become anti-nicotine, and they want to make it hard to get these e-cigarettes. But I worry that if you make it too hard, then people aren't going to make the switch. And we should be encouraging people to make the switch because you reduce your risks so significantly by using e-cigarettes instead of regular cigarettes that it just makes sense from a harm reduction point of view. It's like if you're going to use heroin, use a sterile syringe. Don't use a syringe that's already been used. It's just like a basic harm reduction thing. So the e-cigarettes hold a lot of potential. It could end up saving lots of lives.
Yeah, well, I think some of the criticisms that I've read about, which I think do make sense, is how these e-cigarettes and even vaporized little hookah cigarettes, they're all being marketed with all of these delicious flavors. So if some are watermelon and root beer, and so the kid or younger people's level of interest is because they smell good, they taste good. So I think there's some level of concern as far as you could have someone who's not interested in smoking cigarettes, but because of peer pressure and what's going on with they're very accessible. I see them everywhere I go. I mean, literally right in front of my face when I'm paying for my gas. So there's some causes for concern, and I definitely understand that. But I think for people to equate cigarettes with the e-cigarettes, there's some misunderstanding there. There's some level of disconnect.
Yeah, and I'm a big believer that we don't really need one drug policy. We need dozens of drug policies.
Mm-hmm.
So different drugs can and should be treated differently. So e-cigarettes is an example where you don't want to treat it exactly like cigarettes because they're actually less harmful than cigarettes. But on the other hand, it doesn't necessarily mean that you just have a totally unregulated market. So you might be able to ban flavoring, for instance, but still have e-cigarettes widely available, as opposed to if you just really if you really treated e-cigarettes like cigarettes, then it might become much harder for people to make the switch. And so, in the same way you don't treat marijuana shouldn't necessarily be treated the same as heroin. Each drug should probably have its own drug policy based on its harms, but all at the same time recognizing that there's unintended consequences to every drug policy, which should always take into account that every attempt to prohibit a substance has created a whole host of its own problems, and so part of the optimal drug policy is the one that best reduces the harms associated with both the drug and the policy designed to control the drug.
So when you're actively talking to Congress, and you mentioned certain states, they're very conservative, but they're starting to get on board. What's the current feel that they have? Is it more of a resignation to what we've done is not working, so now they're more open to hear your suggestions, or is there something else going on?
It's a combination. It's a realization that what's been happening for the last 40 years isn't working and is doing more harm than good. So there's growing concern about the number of people behind bars and the huge racial disparities involved in that, and the cost of taxpayers.
Mhm.
So a lot of people are waking up to that. There's the polling, which matters a lot, probably more than anything else. Politicians care about getting reelected, and the polling very clearly shows that voters want change. And then there's interesting things going on the ground. The whole debate in a number of states over uh, CBD oils and Charlotte's Web, a strain uh, of CBD heavy marijuana that treats seizures and helps all these young people and babies that have dozens or hundreds of seizures a day, is really starting to change the minds of members of Congress, because you have all these angry parents that are calling up their office saying, I'm trying to help my child and I don't want to be a criminal. You need to
Mhm.
change the law. And so they're beginning to take note of that, because it's hard to say no to angry parents, I can tell you that. And usually, for decades, the angry parents have been on the other side saying we need tougher laws and we need to arrest more people. But now more and more of these parents are saying what we really need is reform. We need access to medical marijuana. We need to make naloxone, the antidote to opiate overdoses, widely available. Because can't stop. You can't stop your son or daughter from using heroin or from abusing OxyContin. At the very least, you should have access to the medicine that will reverse their overdose if you come into the
Mhm.
room and they're overdosing. Because the last thing you want is for them to die. So it's a combination of practical concerns about the failure of the drug war combined with a change in the political winds.
Yeah,
And Congress is still a little bit behind the curve. I like to say that members of Congress are really good at jumping in front of a parade, but you have to build the parade first. So what we've been doing is building the parade. Now we're starting to see members of Congress jump in front of the parade. So, which I'm fine with. Better late than never.
yeah, well, I guess I'm fine with it too, as long as they get on board at some point to save these lives. Now you were touching on a couple times racial disparity. There are more African Americans and people of color in prisons for the same crimes, like marijuana possession primarily. And in some other cases that they're less in proportion to the white people, and they're getting the maximum prison sentence, the people of color. So considering we're always known to be the most industrialized country and the most westernized country, and we have the most people in prison, and a lot of these sentences are so extreme. Murderers get out quicker. I read about this one guy. He got the 3 strikes law for marijuana, and now he's in prison for life without the possibility of parole. So these things just don't make sense.
Yeah, and they don't make sense. Destroying lives and it costing taxpayers a huge amount of money. I mean, half the people in federal prison are there for a drug offense, and it's consuming a large amount of the Department of Justice's budget. And so that's money that can be used for other things. It could be used. I mean, it certainly could be used for violent offenders or whatever, but it also could be used for treatment and
Hmm.
other things. And the U.S. has 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prison population. And we incarcerate more people than any other country in the world, on both the absolute terms in terms of the total number of people in prison, but also per capita terms. So we're incarcerating more people than Russia, China, North Korea, you name it. And it's not all about the drug war, but it's largely about the drug war. And then just the racial disparities. Like when you look at the statistics, it's very clear that you know every generally everyone that the drug African Americans use drugs at rates very similar to whites. I mean, there's not much of a difference. About 12% of Americans are black. About 12% of drug users are black. But when you look at the prisons, it's like the exact opposite. The war on drugs is being largely fought in communities of color.
Hmm.
Not entirely, obviously, but in large parts, and it's creating huge racial disparities and it's devastated entire communities. You go down to southern states, you've got upwards of a quarter of the black population that can't vote because they have a felony conviction, and they can't vote for life. So it's a clever way of basically rolling back the gains of the civil rights movement. The new Jim Crow is, as people talk about, that once a person gets a conviction, they can be discriminated against legally in employment and housing and in benefits, et cetera. And so we're trying to fix those unjust sentences and just treat drug use and for that matter, drug sales in a much better way. Because other countries are able to deal with this without incarcerating large numbers of their population. We should be able to do so as well. And in fact, our executive director likes to say, at least when it comes to incarceration, it'd be great if America was just average. Like, that's our goal, average. Because right now we're number one, and we don't want to be number one.
Yeah, I know we have that reputation as gunslinging cowboys in the world, and it's really true as far as how we treat our own. And once your conviction is set in stone, that's pretty much your fate. Your fate has been set, and the ramifications extend into your family and to your grandkids. And I mean, this is a legacy no one wants to perpetuate.
Yeah, and there's a whole movement to steal people's records and try to eliminate the discrimination and keep companies from background checks, etc. All of which is good, but I always like to point out that the best solution is to just stop arresting people. Let's just stop. We don't need to, as former Senator Jim Webb said, either the U.S. has the most evil people in the world or we're doing something wrong with our criminal justice system. Because we incarcerate people at such enormous rates compared to the rest of the world. It's obvious that we're doing something wrong, and we don't need to be incarcerating so many people. We don't need to be arresting so many people either. Everyone talks about mass incarceration, but there's a whole arrest problem as well, because the arrest shows up, and so many people get arrested and then aren't even charged with the crime, or the prosecutor drops it, or they get probation, because there's 2.3 million people in the U.S. that are behind bars, but there's another 5 million people that are on parole or probation. We're at 7 million people that are in the criminal justice system and growing every day, and it's unsustainable. If we keep going at the rate that we're going, we're going to get to the point where there's more people inside prison than outside. We're not even going to be able to guard the people in the prison anymore. So I think that's waking a lot of people up, that we just simply can't financially afford to do that anymore.
Yeah, well, if you're hitting people in there, if common sense doesn't wake them up, then hitting them in their pockets with the statistics about how draining it is on our economy, and it's coming out of their pockets, then I guess it's not this happy, wonderful ending where we're all singing Kumbaya together, but whatever wakes them up, like, all right, it's costing you a lot more money, then they're like, oh no, wait a minute, let's revisit this idea.
Yeah, it's money, it's a whole bunch of things, and at the end of the day, for us, at least since we lobby Congress, it's what does it take to get that vote? So if it's the cost, then it's the cost. If it's the human factor, if it's the racial disparities, growing number of members of Congress, are beginning to realize that having so many people in prison conflicts with their religious beliefs and second chances and redemption and things along those lines. You can't, send a first-time nonviolent drug offender away for 10, 15, 20, 25 years. It's just not right.
And it doesn't make any sense. I mean, you take their prime of their life away, and then they come out, and they're institutionalized. What are they really going to be able to do?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really
They're
taken.
coming out. Yeah, their prime of their life has been spent in prison, and they didn't really gain any skills while in prison. And meanwhile, and everyone talks about the people inside prison, but as you pointed out, this isn't just about them; it's about their families.
Hmm.
We have so many kids that are growing up with one or both of their parents behind bars, and that just repeats a devastating cycle. And all those people in prison can be outside prison with their family, um, you know, working, paying taxes, and contributing to society. But so many of them, are wasting, wasting their lives away in prison with sentences longer than, as you point out, a lot of rapists and murderers get.
Hmm. So, okay, so what are your parting words for someone who watches this and agrees with all the good work that the Drug Policy Alliance is doing and wants to get involved in some way?
Well, I would say go to drugpolicy.org, which is our website. You can sign up for our email list. You can donate. Um, I strongly encourage people to contact their elected officials, and I always like to say and emphasize this. I know that a lot of it's easy to give up on elected officials and believe that writing them isn't going to matter, but write them anyways. Even if you think there's no way they're going to change their mind ever, you think they're the biggest jerk in the face of the planet, write them that letter, because at the very least, if they're going to pass these stupid laws, they should at least pass them knowing that people oppose it. But also, it adds up, and we're starting to see a lot of members of Congress that for years, for decades, opposed any kind of reform, now starting to support reform. And so, I, go to drugpolicy.org, sign up for an email list, but at the very least, contact your elected officials and tell them the war on drugs is doing more harm than good, because that's what we really need. Is elected officials need to hear it. Because if all they hear is get tough on crime, then that's what they're going to do.
Hmm.
They need
Well,
to
that
hear the
makes
other perspective.
Yeah, and it really is up to us if we want laws to change, we have to be a part of the solution and not part of the
That's right.
problem. Yeah, not something brand new of a thought, but it still rings true. So
Very true.
yeah, well, thank you, Bill, so much for just sharing what you're doing and what capacity that a lot of us can help ourselves and our communities, because this is just really the war on drugs is not helping. And I think just by having discussions like this, it shows people that they can be effective and a part of the solution. And you don't have to do it all yourself with you and those 4 or 5 other people you got there.
Yeah, good.
All right, we'll try to help you out. Thanks again, Bill Piper at Drug Policy Alliance. You can check them out on their website, and his best advice is get involved and contact your elected officials, and eventually they will have to listen. It might not seem like just one of us can make a difference, but all of us together can. Thanks again.